Thank you for checking out Real Talk Personal Finance. Shit's about to get real. Cash Flow King with you today, and today we have a very special guest back with us for the second time on today's show. We're going to talk about small business challenges featuring the Rent Reverend. He won the 2023 MVP for most popular guest that we had on the show, and I think after we took a little jab at him a couple shows ago, we finally strong-armed him to get him back on today's show. We are going to take the conversation in a slightly different direction than we did the first time. The first time we talked a lot about rentals and things along those lines. Today, though, our conversation, as the title says, is going to be about small business challenges. So, Rent Reverend, welcome back to the Real Talk Personal Finance podcast. If you will, just kind of take us from the start in terms of your venturing into your business ownership side of things.
Gotcha. Thanks for having me. I guess you just want to start from the beginning. I've been an entrepreneur since about, I'm trying to think, probably my sophomore year at college. So that would be, 15, 18 years ago, something like that. I kind of always thought it'd be cool to work for myself. And I got a job in college working for my buddy's grandpa, and he did floor coverings. And so on my days, actually I started in high school. I worked for him in the summers, and then in college I'd work for him on the days I didn't have class or half days or however it was. And ended up, he got sick and got cancer, and he died when I was a junior, trying to get my bachelor's. And after he passed, my buddy and he became good friends with me and my family and all that stuff. And his wife gave me a bunch of flooring tools to start my own business, and that's what I did. I actually had another good friend, and we went into and had a partnership. And when you're younger, it's real easy to start a partnership. You think it'll work out well, and you're kind of nervous about every aspect of owning a business. So if you have a partner, you can kind of lean on their skill set or whatever they got going on. But I don't know if it's good just to have somebody else to blame if it goes wrong. But so that's kind of how my first little business started. We were kind of a jack of all trades. We did everything from stain decks, lay floors, anything that would pay, we did it. And then about, I want to say 2009-ish, we finally landed a big contract with a multifamily, 145 unit remodel deal where we were doing a lot of flooring and trim and all kinds of stuff. And we took on our first employees, and that worked out really well for a little while. And then it just gets muddied with the partnership, like many people know.
Well, I was going to ask you, so when you say you got into a partnership with this person initially, is this just like, hey, we're going to do business together, we're going to run this thing, or is this an actual formal, like, legal documents drafted and formal partnership and partnership tax returns and all that kind of stuff?
Man, I was so green to everything, right? I knew we had to get a actual partnership, but I remember going through just simple stuff like setting up a bank account, getting a business license. When you do a partnership, and it's so far removed now, but we actually had to drive to and declare this and that. I mean, it seemed like we would go to do something, and they're like, well, we need this piece of paper to do that. And we were like, then we'd have to investigate how we would get that done. And that was always a task, right? And then we would go do this. And it just seemed like it took forever to finally make it legit. But yeah, I mean, we 100%, we were 50-50 exactly. We on the labor end and everything. And like I said, it's just two young guys, and I'm still friends with a guy today, and he's a good guy. But it's hard to make up your mind on what direction you want to go, even when you're young like that, even like a work schedule. Like, hey man, we were both in a fraternity, so like, oh, we had this big formal event on Wednesday night. We're gonna go out and party and be college kids. Like, one of us would want to wake up and work on Thursday morning. The other one would be like, well, I'm going to be hungover. Just goofy stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
You're going to
Yeah.
butt heads over decisions. And I said 2009. It's probably 2008 when we got that contract, and we hit a home run and we were making awesome money, and our buddies were working for us and they were making good money, and then life was good. But it was also taken away from our college scholastics. Our grades weren't doing well because we were skipping class to work, and I don't know. Our headspace was we weren't going in the right direction at that point in life. But after we finished with that big contract, I guess we just thought that it was going to go on forever, and that was right when, like, 2008. Everybody remembers that was doing anything professionally, and the phone quit ringing, and it got to the point where I went and took a job with a local store up here just to, make my rent and do what I had to do, and we essentially expunged the business.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
And then
So
what?
that was my first endeavor with being a entrepreneur, and I knew from that point on that if I had my own business that I would have to be a solo deal. It, that's where my mind was at that point. So progressed from there, left college, kind of worked for a few people again. Always kind of knew I wanted to come back to being an entrepreneur, but knew I needed to pay the bills. Life was happening. I was getting ready to get married, and then ended up at my current job as a fireman. That's 10 years ago, so 2014 range. And I through the whole deal, when I worked for a big box store, a retail store, and when I worked for a commercial construction company, I always laid tile. Tile was always my niche, and there's not that many tile layers around, and so it kind of became, a lot of people around town knew me for doing it, and I just did it under my name. It's essentially a side money, a side hustle, whatever you want to call it, and it was good. But I never made a tremendous amount of money at it, but it helped pay the bills or put some back for fun, like you'd want to. And
Beer money.
then, right, beer money. And then once I got hired at the fire department, we worked 24 on, 48 off, so I had a lot of free time. And I noticed a lot of these guys around here had other trades that they did and excelled at, and that being a fireman was a good selling point as far as when you go into somebody's house and you quote a job and they find out you're a fireman. Most of the time, you're a trustworthy individual, and so business kept picking up and picking up. And as life happens as well, we wanted to move into a nicer home as our family grew, and bills stacked up a little bit more, and we needed to make more money. And I thought, well, I'll just take on a little bit more. And before I knew it, I it wasn't a side gig anymore, right? It was I needed to start a business and do this legit. And so that was probably 5 or 6 years ago that I really stayed. I was busier than I needed to be installing tile, and I was just a one man show. So I kind of had, so I did what I wanted to do. I got out of a partnership setting, and it was all on me. And then my client list kept growing and growing and growing. And then here I am in my mid 30s, and I'm working my guts out. I'm making good money, but I feel like at the end of every day, I never can accomplish everything. The actual business aspect, other than doing the labor, was not up to snuff, and I knew that. I just didn't have the time to do it.
So tell the listeners, what do you mean by that? So the labor part's good, you're doing your thing, but what were you feeling like wasn't up to snuff? What do you mean?
Just my accounts were all right. I didn't at this point have a actual business. I was, for a portion of the time, I was still doing it under my name, and so, like, I had stuff coming through my personal account. I had stuff. I didn't have a business checking account. Like, nothing was separated. I wasn't keeping track of mileage. I was paying my bills, and I was doing the bare minimum to get by. I was filing my taxes at the end of the year, but I was not doing anything else. Like, somebody else would call, another potential customer would call, and I either wouldn't take the call, wouldn't get back with them, or I would schedule something, and I'd be so busy that I would miss an appointment. And that wasn't all the time, right? I tried to be pretty professional when it came to that, but you're just going to miss stuff when it gets so muddied with everything else going on. And then at the end of the day, not feeling like you got the labor part accomplished to even start to tackle the paperwork and the quotes and the just administrative end of all of it.
Gotcha.
So then I also noticed that, like, hey, I'm not getting any younger. And I see guys that are 60 that have done whatever trade that's hard on your body on top of being a fireman. And I'm like, I don't want to have knee replacement surgery when I'm 50 years old. I don't want my back blown out. I enjoy the hands-on portion of it. I like the tiling part of it. It's almost like it turns into artwork, really custom stuff. And I think it's nice to see transformations if you're doing bathroom remodels or whatever. So that I decided to take on a few employees, or I decided to take on a helper is essentially where I started. And the guy wasn't the right fit. You know, he was looking for a job, and he worked for a few months and kind of phased out, and he didn't really have a passion for it. And I had a couple of guys like that were not really on the books per se, right? So I didn't have them insured or anything. I always carried liability insurance, but I didn't have workers' comp, and I was just Venmoing them or giving them cash or writing them a check or however. But they weren't making a bunch of money, and they weren't really working a lot. They were just helping me when I needed them. And then about 2.5 years ago, a guy called me out of the blue, just random, and was like, "Hey, I got your number from your mom, and I'm 19. I need a job, and I've been laying some tile at some Section 8 housing up in." And so he really enjoyed laying tile, and he's like, "I want to come apprentice under you." And I was like, "Man, this is awesome." Kid actually has a passion and like wants to learn, and that kind of reignited a spark in me to teach somebody the trade that actually wants to do better and wants to make more money and sees a path forward with it. And he worked out really well for like 6 months, and then he had a friend that was looking for a job. And I always compensate my employees, probably overcompensate my employees, because I know it's hard work, and if I can pay them good, then, keep them around, keep them happy. And I had a guy tell me one time that owned a business that he was like, the only way that you can control your employees is with their wallet. And I don't know if that's necessarily true, but it definitely helps. And if they don't feel like they can go down the road and get a job that compensates them as well as that,
Yeah, it
then
almost stops them
it
from
helps you.
looking in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, and when I when I realized, like, okay, this is going to be nice. When I'm at the firehouse, I have a guy that I trust to service my customers, to take some of the actual labor off of my plate, and I'm making more money, and it's working. So I decided to take on his friend, and we go through the whole deal, right? And I'm learning payroll services, workers' comp. I started a LLC, which I've started a business before, not that big a deal, but just going through the little stuff that comes with it, right? I mean, it's a task. It's going, pretty well. We continue to grow. Our workload's still going up, and I've got the first guy to the point where no longer he's no longer an apprentice. Like I'm giving him a helper now, and he's taking off. And of course, they need help every now and then, or they need a direction, or if we get anything too custom in somebody's house or anything like that, then I'm obviously there for support. And I'm also laying tile too some at this point, and it's going well.
So let's see.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned, because I'm sure the listeners are wondering, I don't want to gloss over it. I kind of want to dive into this a little bit, because somebody's going to be listening and be like, well, wait a minute, how did you do that? And tell us more about that. So you mentioned things like you brought a couple people on, and then you started an LLC, and this, that, and the other thing. Like, for the listener that's listening to this podcast and maybe they have never started a business, or they're thinking about starting a business, and something as simple as you hear, and we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of does somebody need an LLC or not. We're not attorneys. We don't give legal advice. But when you went through it and you made the decision that that's what you needed to do, like, walk us through that. Did you go to an attorney? Did you do this online? Like with the payroll stuff, did you have to contact a payroll company? Did somebody cold call you? Like, how did all that stuff come together?
Well, I talked to my father. He set up multiple LLCs, and he was like, "Man, it's not that big a deal. Get on the Treasury website." He walked me through it pretty quick. I had a few questions. I called my CPA, who's actually a family member and he walked me through some stuff, what to do, what not to do. That wasn't terrible. Acquiring an EIN number, that kind of stuff, setting up a checking account, obviously easy. I just knew I needed to separate the business from my person. And I don't know where I got that. I don't know if I read that somewhere. I know most people that are business owners are going to be like, that's common sense. And right now it even feels like that. But I'm pretty sure my CPA was like, dude, you need to start an S corp. That's going to work best for your situation, and this is what you need to do. And he also recommended a payroll company, and I contacted them, and they were really easy to work with. So
Okay.
I don't know if you want to go forward from that. So we did that for a little while, and my overhead obviously went up 100-fold. Whatever, I don't know the exact number, but my overhead went up quite a bit, and I acquired a third employee. So now I have three guys on payroll. They're making a fairly substantial amount of money. I mean, I'm talking to them about where they need to be and based on skill level and all that. But in my opinion, uh, hourly pay for an employee in a company is like drinking poison for the most part. I mean, you can find some people that are self motivated enough to carry themselves through, but if you're not there, eventually guys are going to sit on a bucket when they shouldn't be sitting on a bucket, right? Or they're going to
Yeah.
take a smoke break or coffee break or whatever. It's just the nature of a human being. And at this point, I'm spread out so much between life, firehouse, tile business, all of it, that I can't stand over these guys' shoulders. And that was the whole point, was to compensate them enough and train them up enough and give them the tools to be able to go out and make money for themselves and for the business. So it got to the point where I was pulling my hair out, man, because I knew what we could do, what everybody was capable of doing, and we weren't doing it. We were way under. And you also got to gauge as an owner and somebody that is passionate about it, and also the one that's making more money off of it. You're obviously going to be more motivated. And when you read the room and you can tell the motivation's gone and the morale's hurt, you have to step back and go like, man, what can I do here? These guys are either going to leave, they're going to just hate their job and not do a good job. They're not going to be polite to customers. They're not going to care if they walk through somebody's house with muddy shoes on. And that's not the direction I want my business to be. I want my, I want somebody to leave me a Google business review, at the end of it, and just with 5 shining stars, and just rant to everybody they know about how awesome their experience was with the company.
So how did you know that? Was it more of, okay, if these folks are just paid an hourly wage, eventually this is what's going to happen? Or you mentioned something about reading the room. Was there a point in time where you're like, you could physically, like it was palpable, you could feel it in the air almost, that something's just not right, like we're on a job site together or something, and they just seemed like they weren't 100% all in? Like, what
It
was it?
wasn't, it was more like when I first started hiring guys, I was there, right? I was either they were apprenticing under me, they were learning from me, and when you're working in cohesively as a team, and there you have that motivation. It's the same thing at the firehouse here, when you teamwork and everybody's spirit comes up and you're learning and it's excitement in the room. Well, when we divide and they feel like, oh, you're the one making all the money and you're not here. Why aren't you here? You used to be here doing help do the work, share the workload. And they don't see the back end. They don't see all the quotes you're going out, all the phone calls you're making, all the emails you're sending out at 9 o'clock at night, or drawing up plans, or whatever the case may be to run the business. And so they feel like, well, I guess I'm just a tool to be used, is the feeling I got. Nobody ever said that. And I was at the point where I was going, all right, I'm going to step back here. I'm going to cherry pick my good customers, and I'm just going to go back to doing it myself. But every time I thought about that, I thought about, man, you said you were going to be done doing this by the time you're 40, because you don't want to break your body down. You don't want to have that feeling of unsatisfied customers, whether it's a timeline issue or you not showing up to when you said you were going to, or whatever the case may be. So I knew I didn't want to do that. I had to figure something else out.
So you hit a crossroads. You could feel that that was probably coming. You're aware enough as a business owner to almost put yourself in their shoes and think about how they might be thinking and feeling. And then you come to a decision point where it's okay, if we're going to continue to run this business with, other people other than just you, then something has to change. Or, like you said, you go in the other direction where you're pretty much back to doing it yourself. You cherry pick your customers, and essentially you're not really accomplishing, I think, what you initially wanted to do as far as growing and building a business and having other people to support that. So you had a decision to make at that point.
Yeah, I needed to decide, like, hey, do you want to just create a job for yourself, or do you want to build a business? And that's where what I stuck on. And it just so happened that I was doing a bathroom remodel for this guy, and he owned a company here locally, and he was actually a partner. And they're very successful, and they're in the construction industry. And I talked to him some about his employees, and he was talking about how he started a zero overhead company, and I don't know if you can actually call it that, if that's actually what it is, but it's as close as you can get to it. And I mean, there's several different aspects about that, but what I kind of stole from him was how he paid his employees. And he was like, "Dude, you got to get these guys on contract if they're solid guys and you want to keep them." He was like, they need to be under contract, whatever terms you feel are necessary. And he was like, then they're commission based. That's the only way to do it. He said they've got to be self motivated and they've got to be self insured, just like a subcontractor essentially is the way I'm using them. But they still work for my business.
So up until this point, though, these folks that are working for/with you, they are W-2 employees, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so now you're thinking about, well, wait a minute, maybe that needs to change. And you're talking to this other person and they're giving you some information about how they're running things, and they're saying you got to put them, instead of having them as a W-2 employee, they need to become 1099 independent contractors.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, based on what I knew that they could produce and what they wanted to earn, and I could kind of backtrack on everything I'm quoting and see where I needed to be money wise for my business and for them to come out on stuff. And it took away a lot of the overhead. So I could get rid of the payroll company, huge overhead. I could get rid of workers' comp. I could get rid of a bunch of stuff like that. And it's not real. It puts them in a different tax bracket. So I had to coach them up on some tax stuff. Not that I'm a pro, but just the basics of like, hey, this is some stuff you need to be looking at. I still provided them with tools and things like that, but it helped motivate them just like I wanted it to. And, we had growing pains with that and some trust issues. I had one guy that could not figure it. He just thought there's got to be some way you're burning me. There's no way that I'm going to make this much money. And I told him, like, dude, you got to trust this and we're going to try it. And if it doesn't work, we can always go backwards and back up and punt. But knowing that you don't have to be here for 40 hours a week to make X amount of dollars, to know that you can come in here and do this job and that job. And if, as long as I'm quoting them and doing my end of it, I mean, the employee I'm talking about, I think in the last quarter of 23, he made 20, between 23 and $25,000. I mean, for a guy that's in his early 20s, no education outside of high school.
Yeah, I mean, that's
And
basically, if you annualize that, that's pretty much six figures a year, right?
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm still, I found that sweet spot where the business took a percentage right off the top of the profit to cover things like being an employee does, like leaving a drill in a driveway or doing this, or if they damage something, whatever, running marketing covered my overhead. So I got a percentage, and then they got to get a percentage, and then the business gets the rest. And it's a pretty sweet setup so far. But what I'm running now, what I'm running into is I've got a couple of guys that are well trained and are that work hard, and I've got a helper that kind of floats between the two, and then I also help some. And now it's an election year, and rates are at an all time high, and it's like I can feel that feeling in the air, that 2008 feeling again. I was there. There's a lot of guys that I work for that are around my age that are builders now, or they're in the construction industry, and they were not being a moron out hustling. They were probably doing the due diligence and like getting their college education taken care of instead of out skipping school to try to make an extra couple bucks like I was with my partnership. But so it's like any if you talk to any small business owner, they're going to tell you the same thing. You can always look back and you're like, golly, I wish this employee was at this level last year, or it's never perfect, and so we're just going to have to see how it all plays out.
I want to go back to that. You made a comment about, okay, I was able to get rid of the payroll company and reduce overhead that way and things like that. So if you're not using a payroll company, are you just like issuing them checks and then sending them 1099s at the end of the year, or what was the payroll company doing for you that they're no longer doing for you, but you're still able to facilitate making sure everyone's taken care of? Because did you have like a retirement plan at one point that you terminated? Is that still going? Like what other things were they doing, if anything?
Well, I actually kept them around. It wasn't expensive to have them idle by when I was just trying to figure it out. I didn't know if we were going to come back to the hourly pay when we first started. And then my thought was, is well, they need help, and so I can still bring on guys at that lower rate that are essentially a helper or an apprentice, and then I'm going to still need that. And it turned out to be true. So I do have a W-2 employee as well, and I've kind of cycled through a few of those throughout our little in the last year, guys that just needed some work in between jobs, or somebody I know that wanted to try it out or whatever. So currently I have two contract employees, and I have that are get 1099s at the end of the year that are self-insured, and then I have one W-2 employee that still has I offer a IRA that I match up to 3%. And that's just one of those things that came about when the morale was down, and I was like, man, what else can I do for these guys? And that was another thing. I was like, man, I'll match a retirement plan. And they're so young. You try to explain it to them, and I don't think anybody ever even paid into it besides myself.
Jeez, yeah, they need to listen to the
Yeah.
show, become premium
Yeah, I
subscribers.
know. I
Yeah.
need to get them. That's
There
right.
you go. You can offer that as a benefit. $3 a month. Give them an extra $3 a month and give them a premium
Yeah.
membership.
Oh,
All right.
goodness
So
gracious.
you got two 1099 independent contractors, one W-2 employee. The payroll company was kind of idling in the background. You're, I guess, still using them for the W-2 employee. Now, does this W-2 person, are they taking advantage of the retirement plan? Are they eligible or what?
They're eligible after their first 6 months of employment,
Okay.
and he's not eligible yet. But he will probably pay into it. I would think this guy, he's a bright kid, and he's not a kid. I mean, he's a man, but he's a young man, and he's pretty savvy with the money that he makes, and I think he's got a future with us as long as he keeps learning and doing stuff like he should.
Does he know that the trajectory or the quote unquote career path or whatever you want to call it in his case might be going from where he is now as a W 2 with a retirement plan once he's eligible to becoming 1099 but more performance based and incentivized compensation? Like, does he know that, or is that a conversation for later, or what?
No, he knows that. I'm pretty upfront with the guys. When I worked for people, as we all have, coming up, and you have all sorts of different jobs. It always seemed like it was so taboo to talk about money, and that's one thing I always wanted to be straightforward with everybody about, and that way it wasn't a secret. And so was making more money than me, and why is that? And I've just seen it too much. And if there's an issue, bring it up. We can talk about it. We can assess it and go from there. But
Okay.
that's his goal. He's shooting to be he wants to be an independent contractor. He's just got a lot of lessons to learn in between, and it's a perfect way for him to do it by making some money along the way. And it's really a dying trade. There's not a lot of guys out doing it, and it's like any trade.
What about the two guys that are independent contractors? Were they like, I guess if they weren't taking advantage of the plan, maybe it doesn't matter. But did they ever say anything to you like, "Hey, man, when we were W-2, we had a retirement plan, and maybe we had benefits or whatever, and now like we don't." Like, did that ever come up in a conversation? And if so, like, how did you handle that?
It didn't. It never came up because sad as it is to say, all they saw was the inflated salary, right? And I also explained to them like, hey, you're what you need to be setting back for taxes goes here, and we haven't been to a tax season yet, so I don't. I mean, we'll see how it goes. Is all I know to say. Hopefully they've been doing right, and I've been trying to kind of mentor them through that, having had a business for as long as I have, and I'm hoping that they do, but you never know. Right at that point, you're getting into somebody's personal finances, and
Yeah,
it's
that's
not really
tough.
my place. Yeah,
So it's like, hey, you're going to make more money, but you need to be setting back something for taxes, and you try to point them in the right direction. But at the end of the day, if they went out and blew it all, and all of a sudden tax time rolls around, then there could be some ripples coming.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that
Okay.
could be like that. It wouldn't surprise me if they don't come back. If somebody comes back and goes like, "Hey man, I got to go get a job with so and so. I got to be a W-2 employee." Because they didn't have they didn't do their due diligence and get everything lined out. But I just wanted to create an opportunity there, and I'm still in the working phases of it. I don't know that it'll ever be perfected, but it's just like anybody that's not just salary based, that's out hustling. They gotta be self motivated and they gotta do right, or it's gonna burn them.
Yeah, so there's no hourly for them, and I think you said you're quoting the jobs, and you obviously are taking into account all aspects of costs and profit and things like that. And so they're basically trusting that hey, you're going to go quote the jobs at an appropriate rate so that everybody's happy, and as long as they're completing those jobs, it's more about what they're earning essentially per job as opposed to what they're earning per hour. And as long as they're productive, then in theory they can make more money in fewer hours as long as they're completing quality work. That's the idea.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that your quality of life just goes up too. If I'm not just telling you every hour, just managing what you're doing, and I go like, "Hey man, here's this job. This is the day that you can do it." And a lot of times, if you're doing like a new construction job where there's not nobody living there, you go like, "Hey, this week this job needs to get done." So if somebody wants to go, I had a guy. He was like, "Man, I want on a skiing trip for Monday, Tuesday." I'm like, awesome, man. You know what you have to get done, right? And if they don't get it done, they know that there's going to be consequences to that. And no more than me being like, hey, dude, what's the deal here? And I'll tell you another thing that's coming with it is where there's two of them that, and they get presented a job, then one of them, they figure out pretty quick like where the best margins are. You can go do a bunch of backsplashes in new construction, and the margins are better than, hey, I got to go over here and do these two custom showers that are going to take 2 weeks. It's still going to pay really well, but it's not going to be near as fast and near as mindless. And so before too long, what's going to happen is, well, you gave so and so this job. That was easy. You're going to have to work your way through that too. And I don't know
Yeah.
how I'm going to handle that
You're
other
gonna
than
come up
try
with
to
a
just be as
matrix or something of like, hey, these are the bullshit ones and these are the easy ones, and everybody gets an A1 versus a C7 or whatever. I
yeah.
don't know. I'm just making that up. But
But
yeah.
it protects my margin. I think I had the best year I ever had last year, and there was I think right in the second quarter. It probably wasn't a full quarter, but there was a month or two there where I felt like I wasn't making any money. And that's when they were still on hourly. Everybody was W-2, and I just felt like, man, every time I got paid, it went, oh, payroll's due, and you had 7,000 or 8,000, $6,000, $7,000 worth of payroll out, and you got this and materials, and I'm like, where does it all go? I don't understand. And so that was just another way to protect my margin, man. Just to give me that peace of mind that if we're doing this job, I mean, this is what we're going to make. Now, where we've gotten slow around the holidays and stuff, and I've still got some fairly substantial jobs, but I'm not going to, out of, I would say, greed. Out of greed, I'm not going to take one contract employee and send them to a job with a helper and let the other guys sit at the house. So if you can imagine, I've got one job to do, right? And I've got two contract guys. So I either have the option, I'm going to let one dude sit at the house and make $0. No. And so then you end up essentially losing out on a large portion of your margin because to create a paycheck for them, I'm sending them both to the same job. They're still getting the same percentage, right?
But then it's
Does that make
multiplied by
sense?
two. Is that what you're saying, or no?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. I gotcha.
Yeah. And that's fine. Again, I don't ever want to think that I'm doing anything out of greed. And your mindset changes too when you take on employees. At first, you're happy that you have people to help and along the way, and you're training them. It's cool. Then you're working through some bumps in the road, and then you get out here and you start quoting jobs and you think more in the lines of like, I got to take care of these guys. These, I've got a full-time job. This is my side gig. My wife works. We have an income. If those guys aren't laying tile, they don't have a job. They don't have a paycheck. They can't pay their bills. And that's when you think about it like that, and it's all coming back to you. It can make you slightly anxious, especially when the phone's not ringing, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty big sense of responsibility. So, like, what happens then in the instance where the phone's not ringing, or you mentioned, 2008 and where things are now? We've talked on the show in other episodes about the possibility of, what's going to happen in 2024. What do you do in that situation? Are you out prospecting for business? Is the Rolodex that big where you can get some referral action going, or I mean, how do you work around the anxiousness part?
Yeah, that's 100% what I did. I've found out that I make more money and I do better business if I spend more time in an office chair than I do with a tool belt on and stay organized. And thankfully, I'm to the point in my life where, unlike 2008, where I didn't really have anybody to call, right? I have a Rolodex and I pick up the phone and I get on and I up my marketing and start making phone calls. And like a matter of a week, I was like, okay, we're good. We're booked out to the end of March. Now, it may not be just Cush, just the top of the line stuff, right? We may be doing some demo work and some bathroom remodels, but as long as everybody's working and then the money and the margins are still there, then everybody can be happy and continue on. And I've gone down several different avenues, whether it's calling builders, calling people out that I know is in the industry, calling distributors that I go through in kind of the local area here. And you, as long as I always tell myself, as long as you're honest, you show up, you're professional, and you do solid, clean work, you don't leave a mess. You're never going to have anything to worry about because you don't have any competition, and you always have competition, but for the most part, my guys are clean cut, honest guys, and I like to think of myself as an honest guy. And I think when people get to know me, they're like, hey, this guy may be more expensive because I am typically more expensive than the average guy, but it's it's what you're getting. It's the experience you're getting. It's also the trust and everything else. Just an all around quality product.
Well,
It's what you're
right,
trying
and
to
most of the
produce.
time in life, you get what you pay for. I mean, if
Absolutely.
people, they want the Walmart price, but they want the Saks Fifth experience or whatever. I mean, it's just
Oh
not.
yeah,
It doesn't go together.
yeah. They got
I,
champagne taste on a beer budget. That's what I
yeah,
always
there you
say.
go. That's right. Yeah. All right. Well, cool. So that's good. So I mean, we're recording this on Sunday, February 4th. This episode will probably come out in a couple weeks once I get done editing. I get some other ones scheduled out, but just from a timing standpoint, you mentioned till the end of March. I mean, that's basically 2 solid months of work. That's pretty good. I would say that, and I don't know, maybe you have thoughts on this, like somebody that works in a similar type of business in the construction area, are they normally booked out that far? Like, is that pretty robust for your type of work or what?
I mean, I think that that's probably the average for a good contractor. It's also just a perspective thing because since COVID happened and everything went so nuts between the housing market and everything else, like everybody knows, those times I was picking up the phone, somebody's going, hey, I need you to do this job. And I go, all right, 2025. You know what I mean? Like, I'll be there
Yeah.
next year. And me and dead serious, and it's terrible to be that way. It's not good to not be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel because I just don't think you don't run your business the way it needs to be, right? And you're so consumed with getting to the next thing that it can hurt your quality if you're not careful. And there's just a ton of stuff like that to be aware of that you learn and grow through the whole process of it, and a lot of it you learn through just attrition and some of it doesn't just pop out like, whoa, light bulb, I just learned that, right? But then you think about it and you're like, wow, it's a lot different than I used to do stuff. And I don't know how it develops. It's just like a kid growing up, right? Like you ask a kid, like, how, what, do you remember learning how to, the ABCs? Do you remember learning the ABCs? They're cash flow king. Like you don't remember
No,
that,
no,
but
I
at some
not at
point
all.
right. That's what I'm getting at. So there, it's fun to run and build a business, but it's also very high anxiety at times.
But you're as busy as you are and booked out as much as you are with bringing on folks. Your capacity is also increased so that hopefully you don't have to tell somebody. I mean, yeah, it still might be a few months out, but you're not telling them it's a year out at this point, right? I mean, so
No,
that's
no,
yeah,
no.
yeah, that's good.
Yeah, no, that it's definitely been better in that aspect, and it's always just an ebb and flow. Though you go a month and it's great, and then you go another month and you go, well, I don't know how this is going to keep going. I'm worried about my guys' paychecks, and it's
Yeah, it's
just
just
if you talk to somebody that's done it for 30 or 40 years, they just tell you, man. And sometimes you got to hear it, right? Like it ebbs and flows, buddy. Or you hear some guys say, "Well, I used to have 12 guys that worked for me, but now it's just me and my helper. And it's just not worth running all these guys." And so it's kind of like, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Does the work come first, and then you try to find the quality guys to take on the work, or do you develop your employees and bring on more employees, hoping that there will be more work? It's a tough call, and
it
there's no
is.
right answer.
I think in any industry though too, like things just have a tendency to, for the most part, most of the time, work themselves out. Like I'm in a completely different field. Everybody that listens to the show knows, and you know that I work in financial services. But technically, I also work on commission. And I don't want to make the show about me, but we get paid in a bunch of different ways. And yes, there's a residual component, which is really nice. But then there's also components that you're paid for work that's done as it's done. And so in a lot of ways, I kind of draw a parallel between those two things and think that they're somewhat similar because like last year was a record year for me personally too. And I'm thinking, okay, how's that going to go this year? Like what, where's it going to come from? And how's this going to happen? And I've had those thoughts in years past too. And every single year, it just kind of sort of seems to work itself out in some way, shape, or form. Like you said, if you take care of people and you do the right thing, and most of the time you're going to be fine. But it's hard to see that in the moment when you have a month that's blockbuster, and then the next 2 months it's like meh, and then you know what I mean. Like it's just I think in any area of life of business that can happen, especially when there's a commission slash incentive slash performance based pay, and I think that's something that not a lot of people understand, not a lot of people are necessarily used to. Like I know a lot of people that work on a salary, and there's nothing wrong with that. And some of them have salary plus, incentive pay, whether it's bonus or salary plus commission or whatever. But then there's people that it's kind of an eat what you kill, quote unquote type of environment. And it can be very different. And a lot of people just don't seem to understand that. But I think that's one area that, whether it's financial services or tile business or fill in the blank, that there's a lot of similarity there. But yeah, I think that it will work itself out the vast majority of the time. Now, if I had a business with 300 people or you had a business with 300 people, okay, maybe that's a little bit different. But when you're a kind of a smaller operation, I think that it's easier, quote unquote, for things to kind of unfold the way that you would like to see them unfold ultimately.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Do you ever feel like, as a commission employee, that your commission's not up to snuff?
Yeah, I do. Actually, it's funny that you say that. And so in the financial services world, so I'm technically a W-2. I jokingly call myself a W-2 peon or W-2 peasant, right? I mean, I make a decent living, but I technically work for the man. And there's folks that have their own business, and I've had thoughts of going on my own in the past, and maybe we'll do another episode on that. But as a W-2 employee, working for a larger organization where essentially the company owns the clients, and even though you're the face of the company and you're the one that's managing and building those relationships, at the end of the day, if they decide you don't work there anymore, you don't work there anymore. But there's a lot of things that they do provide. They provide benefits, and they provide a retirement plan, and they provide certain types of technologies and compliance and all that sort of thing. And so where I'm going with all this is when you look at things like commissions for a W-2 like myself, they might be lower, sometimes substantially lower than a commission might be on the same exact product, let's say, for somebody that's independent, that went out on their own, that has to go drum up business 100% from scratch, where they own the client and they own the business relationship, but they're also paying for their own insurance, their own technology, their own compliance officer, their own office space, their own, set of there's a lot of things that they take on, but the commission itself might be a little bit higher. So I don't want to say that it's 6 of one, a half a dozen of the other, but you have to kind of look at what we've sometimes talked a little bit about on the show when we talk about career stuff is like total compensation. So I understand and realize that yes, the commission is part of it, but there's a lot of other things that are happening that the company is providing that I benefit from. So, I try to look at it holistically. But sure, yeah, you say, hey, if I sold this product and I was independent, I would make 5 times what I make on it now. Yeah, but I'd also be paying for 100% of everything else that I was doing. You know what I mean? And it's not to say that one's better than the other, or one way is right or wrong. But yeah, I would say that it's easy to look at it and say, if I worked elsewhere or worked 100% for myself and my own business, then the commission rates would be very different. But there's a lot that goes into it too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
one of the things you said something there that kind of I wanted to touch on. It was about being the face of the business, or like when they think your clients think of you, they like you're their guy, correct?
Yep.
Well, that's something else I struggle with. Is I wanted to try to find a way where my guys could drum up business, and I don't know that that's a thing, but there may be a way to do it, there may not productively. But one thing that when I separated started my LLC and separated for myself, I think you recommended a book and I read it and I took some stuff from it, and I wanted to separate my face from it. For so long, when I showed up, they were getting me as an individual, and it was really neat to watch how, like, my marketing, I use things like we, and I use the business name, and how people call my phone and they don't ask for me personally, they ask for my company's name, and it's almost a relief. And so I took the guy that, in my perfect vision of going forward, if I could pick what happens, and whether or not it will, we'll see. But I want a foreman. I want somebody to do what I'm doing, somebody to be there to, like, as a support role manager, to go out. And I've been working with this guy on doing quotes, putting stuff together, meeting customers. Like I said, professional guy. He's good at talking to people. And I also sold it to him as, you don't just get your commission off of the job you're performing, right? Because that was the question in his head. He's a smart enough guy. He goes, well, I can still only make X amount of percent of this amount of revenue I'm bringing in. And I go, no, that's not right. I just gave you a helper. You teach him what he needs to know. And if you make him capable to go do a job, guess what? You get a percentage off of his job too. Anything you touch. So I wanted him to see my vision going forward, being, this isn't all you get, but he also has to take on more responsibilities, more roles in my business. He's not there yet, but we've been working on it, and it's interesting. But you saying something about being the face of your business was just, I don't know, it made me think about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. And you mentioned, hey, like, you're their guy, and that's true. But actually, within the larger organization that I work for, I also have other resources and other help. Like, I have a colleague that actually is in a completely different state, that is 100% remote, that still interacts with a lot of my clients. And I'll give you an example. We got news relatively recently that one of the organizations that we provide retirement services for, we have several different plans with them. And one of them was a pension plan that they froze many, many years ago. And it's kind of just been sitting on the books. And they recently said, you know what, we're going to go ahead and, we're just going to terminate the plan. And when they do that, the employees that have funds in that, terminated or frozen with soon to be terminated pension plan, they have some decisions they have to make with what they want to do with those funds. And so, an example, like in my case, I have a lot of different clients that I work with, but I was able to pull a list of those folks that were affected by this and touch base with my colleague within the organization and say, hey, can you reach out to these clients and walk them through this process. Now, these are clients that know me, they've met with me, but they're also going to hear from him, and he's going to mention my name when he calls them, and he's already started working on that list. And because of the trust that's built, initially with myself as the face of the company to them initially, and now all of a sudden there's somebody else internally who is able to assist, who also represents the company, and people are comfortable with that. And I guess where I'm going with this, and conceptually I think it's somewhat similar, where the company is the company, but yet they have their people within the company that they know and that they trust, and business can still be done that way. And kind of to your point about everything you touch, you're going to make money on, in this particular case with my colleague, we have an arrangement where, depending on certain lines of business and all that sort of thing, where anything he touches, he's still being compensated for. But as am I. Just like with you, you're getting your percentage, from and through the business of the things that your folks are doing for you. And it's still the business that the customers are ultimately working with, but they might be working with different people within the organization. And I think, that's one of the things in really, I guess, any business where you want to be able to grow, you want to be able to scale, but to your point, you, me, anybody else, you're only one person. And so it's nice to find a way to have resources, whether those are employees or colleagues or, a marketing department or whatever the case might be, to continue to build up the business, build up the brand, and leverage that to grow into whatever it is that you want to grow into. And for the listeners, the book I think that you alluded to is The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. We'll put a link in the show notes for that for anybody that wants to check it out. That's the one you were talking about, I believe, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
Definitely
talking about
worth a
working
read.
on your business as opposed to in your business. Not to say that you can't do both, but really about taking a step back and looking at things holistically, and where's your time best spent? I think you nailed it when you said, I make more money and my time is better served in an office chair versus wearing a tool belt. And I think that perfectly illustrates one of the concepts, from that book.
It
Cool.
takes a lot of trust to do that, man, because everybody that started any kind of business is so passionate about what they do and the product they bring to the table or the service. And to let go a little bit and to trust somebody else to have your name on their chest is what I always say, and be, representing you, your company. And at the end of the day, you're just hoping and praying that you've trained them and you give them the tools to do a job that's up to snuff. And like I said, that people can give you shining reviews and you can keep going forward.
Yeah.
But it's tough. It's tough for people like myself and anybody else that's ever started a business. You got to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people out there too. You mentioned before about not having competition, kind of, half joking about that. But I mean, people always hear, I've heard about, a lot of contractors in different areas, they don't return calls. They don't pick up the phone. And like just doing that, I feel like you're light years ahead of the vast majority of people that work in certain types of industry. So.
Absolutely.
So what other challenges have you had, whether it's from employees transitioning them or accounting, or like if someone's listening to this, whether they have their own business or not, and they're like, all right, the title of the show is Small Business Challenges, and we've heard about some different things along the way. Is there anything that stands out to you where you're like, this was my biggest hurdle, or this is something that keeps me up at night? Anything that we haven't covered?
No, I mean, other than probably I'm not the best with technology. I never have been. It's just not my thing. And the way the world is, I think we talked the other night over a beer about how I struggle with, you know, converting simple contracts and getting them over to where people can e-sign them. And, I had to learn all that stuff through bugging people that I thought could figure it out or calling, just however I could do it to figure it out. I'm still not good at it. I get fussed at. I have a new CPA. She was like, when do you reconcile your credit card bills and this and your bank account? And I was like, what are you talking about? And I know it sounds so ridiculous to
No,
a
it
lot of
doesn't. That's
people,
probably most people.
but like I know what reconciling a checkbook is. I mean, my dad is in the finance world, and he beat that in our head when we were growing up. And but after all it's said and done, whatever happened that day at 5 o'clock at night, or whenever I get home, or I pick my kids up from school, and I go home, and it's time to play with dad or do whatever we're gonna do as a family. I'm not, and that's what literally this is exactly what I told the lady. I said, I'm not gonna sit down and at a desk while my kids are playing outside or playing in the basement or my wife's cooking dinner, whatever's going on, and I'm going to sit here and reconcile credit card. No, I'm just not going to do it. There's hours to do it. I don't want to sound like a lazy guy, but like I have a certain cutoff, and the reason why I do all of this is so for them, really. At the end of the day, and so you got to remember that, right? You can't let it consume you because it will try to if you're truly passionate about your trades. So you have to balance that as well. And I don't care if I got to pay a bookkeeping company or whatever, but I'm not reconciling it. I have it separated. If I buy something for my business credit card, then it comes across my QuickBooks. That's what I use for my accounting and bookkeeping, and it's really like the most simple form of it, and it works for me. And I'm not going to listen to a CPA harp on me about not doing it. That's where I'm at on it.
So are you going to hire a bookkeeper?
I may. It just so happens my CPA owns a bookkeeping company, so she
Oh,
may wrangle me in.
self-interested there. I was going to say, if we got any listeners that are bookkeepers out there, email the show. We'll get you in touch with the Rent Reverend, Real Talk Personal Finance at gmail.com, and we'll send them over to you.
You just better be the best. Just know that going in, because I'll probably yell at you if you're not. I'm just kidding.
That's cool.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything else, really. No.
The only other book I was going to say, when you started to say something to the effect of like, this is what I do it for, right? Family. And there's another book that is completely unrelated to finance, but it's one of the best books that I think I've ever read. And for anybody that has kids, or even for anybody that doesn't, we currently don't, but it's called Just 18 Summers. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. But it's a tearjerker, so just keep that in mind if you decide to read it, anybody. But it's a really good book, and I think it all comes back to you want to look at everything holistically, and as important as finance and business and money and all that is, at the same time, it's just a tool, and it's a tool that needs to be used to live the life that everybody wants to and spending their time however they want to spend it. And in your case, being a family guy, like that's important to you, and that's great. And you have to draw the line somewhere. Otherwise, you're going to work 7 days a week and nonstop. And there's people that do that, and there might be a time in life where you have to. I know there was a time in life where I was working six plus days a week, 80 plus hours a week, and I swore to myself no more, and I'll never go back. But at the time, at that particular time, I had to do it, right? And so I think you're past that point where you have the resources and ability now to outsource what you need to outsource, and you're not going to be reconciling receipts at 6 o'clock in the middle of the week.
No.
And I don't blame you. I really don't.
No.
So.
Well, it's good you figured it out when you did, man. I'm telling you, my dad, he's a great father, and he's an awesome guy, but he's a company guy from that generation, and he's in his mid 60s, and he still drives an hour to work, and he gets home at 6 o'clock every night. And I'm like, I just tell him, like, Dad, like what are you doing here, man? You've done well for yourself. He's invested well. He's got a bunch of rental property. Everything's going for him, and he just feels like that's where he needs to be, and maybe that's where he wants to be. But I don't think that when you're laying there on your last day that you're going to look up and go, man, I'm so glad that I worked 12 hours a day until I was 65, because it goes by too fast.
Especially when you don't have to. Like there's listeners that might be listening to that and say, well, yeah, that sounds great, guys, but I got a family to feed or whatever. And like we get that. We're not trying not to be sensitive to that, or whatever. But when you're in a position like he is, or somebody that doesn't need to do that, then I think that's where it crosses over into, is that really what you want to be doing? Or, are we doing it to, I don't want to say check the box, but because we feel like that's what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm guilty of that. There's times where it's, 3:30, 4 o'clock, and I'm pretty much done for the day. Emails caught up, clients are taken care of, everything's good. And I'm like, well, maybe I should leave the laptop on for another hour or so until 5. Like, what the fuck are you doing? You know what I mean? And it happens.
Yeah.
And I think we're all guilty of that to some degree. But, so cool.
It's a good lesson for people to take away. Money's not everything. It's good to have a little bit of money, but at the end of the day, everybody knows what's important.
That's
and
right.
It's not that.
That's right. Well, with that, we thank you once again for taking the time to come on the show. We will do another poll at the end of 2024. Hopefully you win it again. hopefully we'll have you on here again at some point, throughout the year, whenever there's a topic that you want to talk about. I thought this was a good one because it's something that's near and dear to your heart that you're, involved with pretty much every day for the most part. So, it was nice to have you back on the show. I hope the listeners enjoyed it. If anybody has any questions for the Rent Reverend or anything you'd like to ask, feel free to email the show, realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com. We'll get you in touch. And with that, thanks again for coming on. We will see you in the next episode.
Thank you, sir. Have a good one.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.